Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Cenap Aydin, the director of Tevere Istituto Tevere. I'm very delighted to be with you this afternoon from Rome with a very great friend of mine, David Lehmann, from originally from this is I think the first thing originally from where, but he's from UK, but now in Jerusalem, and we will also talk about remembering and the memories of David. David, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
How are
Cenap.
you?
I'm fine. I'm locked down in Jerusalem. Yes. Oh,
Very well.
great.
Like everyone else, we are also locked down here in Rome.
It's lovely to talk to you and to reach out to the rest of the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, today is a very special day, 27th of January, and this is the International Day of Remembrance. We are remembering, the end of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, and it is a very symbolic date. And this is the end of the Auschwitz concentration camp. And that time, it was part of the Nazi Germany, and now it's in Poland and everywhere around the world, in Italy, in Germany, in Israel, in the United States, people are remembering this important day. And today, being Wednesday, during the general audience, even just on the lockdown, Pope Francis, keeps up with the general audiences. Even Pope Francis, the Holy Father, also remembered, and he said, remembering is an act of expression of our humanity. And so I would like to, today remember something very personal of your personal history, if I would say, David. And I would like to hear more of your mother and your connection also with this history. And shall we maybe learn more through your personal history, through your personal history of your mother, what we should actually really remember of those years. Please.
Well, yes. This year, in fact, in many ways is rather special or marks a particular moment in my family history because for reasons which will become clear, I and my sister, and this may sound a strange thing to say today, but it's part of the reality of our world. I have this month recuperated the German citizenship, which the Nazis took away from my mother in 1942. Mm-hmm. Many people, some people might be surprised by this, but I maybe will explain later why it's so important in the context of Europe and my country today. My mother was born in 1919, and at the age of 17, in 1936, she came to England. You can see a picture, I think, here of, do you want to show up the picture of her with her young cousin?
Sure.
There you have the girl in the white dress is my mother with her little cousin aged called Marianne Epstein, or at least eventually when she married, she was called Marianne Epstein. So as the Nazi regime was getting more difficult, she came to England and she then immediately started to work to get her parents out of Germany. And in that process, she had some help from English people, because a lot of English people, a lot of German, well, anyone who wanted to come to Britain as a refugee had to get support, be without a sponsor. And she managed to get that. And she then brought them over very late in 1939. Now, in the last year, something very interesting has happened in my family, which is that a German school teacher called Sabine Herle has got in touch with us. She somehow tracked us down, and she has been doing research on the history of our family, in particular of my mother's parents during that period. And what she has found, what she has reminded us, but we didn't know it in detail, and this is an interesting point as well, that her father had a small business, and he was forced to sell the business at a knockdown price, and a former employee of his took advantage of that. And then one day the Gestapo or the Gestapo came, and they were taking Jews away, and the housekeeper said, well, no, he was called Moritz Weil. Herr Weil is not well, but there's a Jew behind that door. And so they took away my mother's brother-in-law, who then was taken to Dachau. In fact, luckily he was released, because this was in the 30s, and with my mother's sister, they went to America, and their daughters are in California today. So my mother was in England trying desperately to get her parents out. And they were not young, and eventually in 1939 they came. No. But the little girl who you saw in that picture was not so lucky. And she eventually married Mr. Epstein, and they escaped, and they eventually were caught up in Drancy in France, which was where there was a notorious roundup, and they were taken away to Auschwitz and they perished. But in my family, there was always this piano. And the piano was the Epstein's piano, and I didn't know what this was all about, and who were the Epsteins. Eventually, of course, but very late in life, I put this together and realized that this was the piano which had come from the Epsteins somehow into our possession. But for my mother, certain things about Germany and her life in Germany remained with her all her life, at the same time as she also became a great lover of England. For example, the music teaching, she had a music teacher in Freiburg who also went to America and became a founder of the early music movement. And she was very keen that we should all do music. Because she left at the age of 17, her education was cut short, and she was obsessed with giving us education, and that girls should have 2 professions. So both of my sisters are excellent musicians and also doctors. Anyhow, she married my father, and they only, in fact, lived in England for about 10 years, because in the mid-40s, my father joined the United Nations as a translator, and they went to live in New York, and later came to live in Germany. And my mother was extremely attached to her father and her mother, of course, but also particularly she was very, very attached to her father. And we can see why, because of the time that she had in London when she was trying to get the papers to get him out of Germany. So that was very dramatic, but she never talked, and I think this is the last thing I will say, actually. She didn't talk much about this. We didn't talk, and this is, of course, a very common feature of survivors. I don't know if my mother counts as a survivor. I mean, nowadays, all sorts of people say they are children of survivors. She was a refugee. She managed to get away, and she didn't, thank God, she didn't go to a camp, or she wasn't taken prisoner. And but she didn't talk much about it at all. And although she didn't live that much in England, her English became her mother tongue. When she came to England, I don't think she spoke any English. It became her mother tongue, and she became very attached to England. Even though they lived in Geneva, they often came to England, obviously, but they lived always in Geneva. And so then what happens 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, we had this terrible referendum.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up the next morning with this sense of enormous shock. And when I realized that somehow half the British population were just dead against many of the things that I just took for granted and believed in, you know. And so eventually, with my sister Anthea, we applied for a restitution of my mother's citizenship. My father was also born in Germany, but he left in the 1920s as a teenager. And his parents already were established in England, so we weren't entitled to a restitution because he had become a naturalized British. But then, and at that time, in fact, 4 or 5 years ago, the German rules did not allow a claim through the mother's line, but later they changed the rule. And so now we've been granted this, given back the citizenship, it's very strange. But you can see from the story about the Sabine Herle, the school teacher in Freiburg. My mother came from Freiburg in southern Germany. And the interest she has taken in our case, and she's written articles in the newspaper, and she wants to make sure there's a Stolperstein, a stone, memorial stone in front of the house where they lived. And I've seen this a lot in Germany. The interest in the Jews, and indeed commitment to Israel, not always an easy relationship, but the commitment and the rebirth of Jewish life in Germany, the substantial number of Germans who study Hebrew, who convert to Judaism. I think the head of the Berlin Jewish seminary, so rabbinic training school, which under the German system is funded by the government, as are the Protestants and the Catholics, is actually a convert, you know. And there's a lot of this rapprochement, shall we say, and of course, sense of, well, of duty or of guilt and of repair, which many others could learn from. I think that's as much as I want to say now.
Thank you, David. For me, it's interesting also to, you know, that part of the memory I share with you, because that year I spent a half of the year in UK and in Cambridge, and that's why I was just observing all these also debates, you know, among people, you know, I mean about Brexit and just people discussing. I was over there in the first half of the year. So as soon as I left and there was a referendum, and then I remembered through that. Back to the German experience, I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned about rabbinical college. Person I know, the rector of it,
Well, you know him.
Rabbi Homolka. Yes, he's a very active also in interreligious, interfaith dialogue. And yeah, this is something I would say maybe using a more sort of theological also term like Versöhnung, reconciliation. I think I see a great effort, at least from one part of the German society. We know also there are so many challenges in this period of time about anti-Semitism. There are also some social political movements. They are unfortunately not, you know, sharing the general attitude of the German society and German government. But this is something, you know, unfortunately everywhere. And may I ask you a question? How does it feel? I mean, just I know just you're always connected for your research. You're okay. You are British. You are. I mean, you have lived over there, but always with Brazil, with Italy for your research. But now, does it feel it's something new for you, being like a bridge between the island and the continent? I mean, having now just two identities together, maybe.
Oh yeah. Oh, I just want quickly to show a picture of my mum.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just a
Where are
minute.
we? It's here now. Da, 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 da.
Okay.
There you are. Yeah. Are you showing it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my mother in 1968 when they went on a trip to, my father went to work on a conference in Tehran long before the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in a moment of unusual unusually carefree image of her. You'll notice these people are German. My father has a German Jews. They take things very seriously. So there's a very thick guidebook next to her. I
Sure.
thought I
Sure.
just wanted to show that. Now, back to your question.
Thank you. It's a very nice picture and very intercultural, actually. The
Yeah,
pre-Islamic Iranian heritage and being Iran, and then just uh, thinking of her multiple identities, very intercultural, interreligious picture.
yeah, yeah. So you're saying, am I a bridge? Oh dear. Is there a bridge between this country? We don't even know what the name of this country is anymore. Is it United Kingdom? It's a disunited kingdom.
Mm.
Is it between, and the Brexit was very much driven by Englishness. I mean, Scotland voted heavily against Northern Ireland, despite having a large population, slightly more than half population Protestants committed to the union, voted heavily against Brexit. But so there's England and Wales which are left. But do I feel a bridge? I'm not unfortunate. Well, I think what I feel is how deeply culturally divided this country is,
Mhm. Mhm.
as indeed are other countries at the moment, of course, and that's what it revealed, um, it's like in America, you don't have, if you voted one way, you suddenly discover you don't have any friends who voted the other way, and and there are all sorts of different ways of thinking. And of course, these are divisions not only of culture, they are of social class, education, and so on. So you have these islands of sort of cosmopolitan culture in and around university towns, but also actually in heavily immigrant parts of East London, for example, not only among the rich. And then you have this other country which somehow is elsewhere. And so I think that's the bridge we have to that's the bridge we have to make, really. There's a part of England that is forever European, and there's a part which apparently will never be European.
Mhm.
It's it's quite it's quite a serious problem, really, very
Mhm.
serious. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, it's a big challenge to the European identity, and also I mean, just I would like to just go back, just something a very short remark, but I would like to go back to again the core of today. But actually, I think we have also the huge confusion of definitions, I will say, because here we are talking about two aspects: European or being member of European Union, because there are countries like Switzerland, which is in the heart of Europe. It is not part of European Union, and like countries like Norway, it is part of the whole European culture, history, and civilization. So I find it quite, interesting. People would like to, make the differentiation. I mean, just make or sometimes confusion. Is it European or just a member of a European Union? I mean, unfortunately, most of the time we have also sort of confusion here, I guess.
Yeah.
It's something that you said, something interesting. I would like to pick up a little bit more. I mean, yes, so many people. I mean, we usually this day remember, especially people, of course, they were brutally killed in the concentration camps and everywhere in Europe and under the Nazi regime. But I think here what you were saying, how should we classify? You just mentioned the refugee, being refugee, or just the problem of citizenship, that you cannot use anymore your rights and freedoms formally recognized by the constitution because you were born in that country and attended all the schools and you loved that country, you lived for that country, for its people. But then you had this unfortunately the clash, what's due to the political situation. Here I think we can just maybe uh, shall we, I mean, redefine the idea of violence from a broader perspective, because it's not just, I mean, and the violence against the life is very, I mean, of the fundamental, I will say, just point that we are focusing on. But we see maybe here a more like extended violence to different spheres of life, different parts of the human experience. Shall we really just approach from this perspective to understand really better what happened to people who could leave Germany on time, but still stayed in this the violence, being excluded from the country that they were born and lived most of their life.
Well, yes. I mean, the threat, and I mean, we have it now a lot. We have a lot of it in sort of in political discourse, in when people avoid talking about certain subjects. Sometimes I come to Israel because I have a partner in Israel, and I even found myself, I had to apply for Israeli, I haven't got it yet, but I had to apply for Israeli citizenship in order to come and see my partner. That was all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually particularly feel tied emotionally to Israel for, as a society, and so, but then, there are times when you don't, or meetings and places where you don't want to mention the word Israel. You don't know how people will react. There are these aggressions and it's a sort of violence that loom. But the violence, I mean, what you're also saying is that the law, through its application, although it may not be physical violence, it puts people under enormous pressure. We have this, of course, with the situation of migrants in Britain. We have it even with the situation of European citizens in Britain who now find themselves in a sort of bureaucratic labyrinth, and then, and not to speak of other all sorts of migrants who are spied on or checked on or get tied up in paper. And these people are very frightened. So yeah, I mean, the physical violence is sort of another stage, really. But I think now what we've seen with the sort of politics we find in America in particular, it's getting pretty nasty. Yeah. So you're right. There's a different degrees of violence. There isn't only, it's not an all or nothing that either there's violence or there isn't, because so many situations people feel under threat or feel insecure or are made to feel insecure in so many ways. Yes. Now the latest is the violence of walking in the street without a mask. Because if you walk in the street or you walk into a shop and you don't wear a mask, you are challenging people to challenge you. It's quite shocking, actually.
Yeah, this is a very interesting period of time that you are actually living in different parts of the world. I mean, you are now in Jerusalem. Here we are in Rome. so many friends today. I'm sure also there are so many friends who are listening to us from Germany, because I shared also with some channels in Germany. I don't know, just before we, finish this lovely moment to, remember and to actually refresh our memories about what really happened through a very personal history. I can just, ask, our friends who are actually watching us, if do have, just if they would like to, share something, if they would like to ask further questions to David. Here I'm just reading a colleague, Yusuf Allah, what an extraordinary family story. Thank you, Professor Lehmann, for sharing it with us. I suggest, if he has not done yet, to write a book about this story so we remember it. There's a suggestion for you. Let me, and another friend, Attilio Galimberti, saying that he is also agreeing with Yusuf, and two friends on the Facebook page, they encourage you about the publication. I don't know, do we have such a project?
No, not really, no. Confessional literature, I don't know. I don't think, no. You think, why do they think the story is worth publishing?
Actually, we are not very interactive with them, but if they just heard this question, they can write it down. But I think usually people find this, I mean, this happens, I don't know if it's the case, because, when it's your personal history or family history, this is something very, natural, part of your identity. But whenever you share it, whenever it arrives, to the public, to the audience, public is the Italian version, to the audience, and I think there's something different happening, that maybe just they find something, related to their personal history, or they discover something they didn't know beforehand. I mean, this is my uh, hypothetical answer, but maybe they have something else if they can just would like to share here. But I think just something they would like to suggest. Okay, if we do not have any other questions or comments, I would like to really thank you, David, for this moment that you shared with us and with friends who are just watching us in this moment. And this video also will remain again on the Facebook page of Tevere Institute, so they can just watch it again and share with your friends. And which is my maybe just I ask you the last word to you, but again, just many thanks. So that moment, I think this personal sharings and experiences are really fundamental to really understand that this is something happens directly to human persons, to their lives. I mean, this is what the Italian writer Primo Levi was saying with his title, "If This Is a Man." I mean, that was the idea of just wake up. This happened to human persons like us, and that's why I think it was for me very touching listening to you. I mean, I saw you. I mean, your emotions and your moments when you are just trying to choose the words, and I think that's really makes us to remember, through this experience. Please, for the last word for the greeting our friends who are watching us, David.
Well, I've never done anything like this before. I've never really I've never written about my personal life, and it's only this. It's really thanks to this teacher Sabine in Freiburg that this has kind of come back and been somehow reborn. I think I also have had a German student who did a PhD on various aspects of Israeli and Jewish life in Berlin, and she's also speaks Hebrew and so on. So I've had a personal in personal contact with this stream of contemporary Germany, and I find that very moving, really. And you know, the fact that my country is moving in the way it is, if it is indeed, and the fact that I still am not sure if it is my country, that tells us that this can happen anywhere. That's the most important. That is the most important. And you know, the archbishops, the rabbis, the popes, they've all said it, and it has to be repeated again and again. Thank you.
Thank you. Toda Rabbah and Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
להתראות.